Over the years, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different founders and organizations, mostly startups, nonprofits, community-driven businesses. And what struck me is how similar the struggles are across small businesses. What I've noticed is that usually the founders work very hard and they're extremely genuine. They care a lot about creating an impact. And as they step up, they face a lot of the same challenges in leading their teams and building something that's actually sustainable. They're usually dealing with a number of things like lack of resources. They try to get a small team to do the work of a much bigger team. And this type of hustling works for a while. Things get done and there's some pretty major progress that gets made this way. But eventually, what happens is that the growth that they were experiencing slows down and people get tired. And the team stops believing that the business is a vehicle to achieving their personal goals. It really has to do with their belief in the founder's ability to lead them towards the vision. And what I've seen is that this happens even when the founder has strong leadership qualities. Here's the conclusion I've come to after seeing this play out so many times. The real problem is not just a lack of resources. It's the founder's dependence on a leadership team that's coming from an entirely different set of experiences that don't really translate well to this early stage of growth. And it almost always pushes the founder into making some bad decisions that aren't obviously bad on the surface. They're just a set of strategically misplaced calls in their stage of growth, which cost them from actually achieving the greater growth. So I want to unpack the things I've consistently seen after a decade of working alongside many founders and early stage initiatives that keep organizations from reaching their potential and what founders can do to fix this. The ones who achieve their goals aren't the ones who start working harder. They're the ones who start building differently. It's more about creating the conditions for growth that actually last. So here's how I've seen growth usually play out. It tends to unfold in three phases. Phase one is what I'd call the founder's phase. There's one individual who is very entrepreneurial, who spots a gap and starts creating value in that space. In a startup, that might mean building an MVP, getting traction, and perhaps pulling in some seed funding. In a nonprofit, it's creating impact around the mission enough to get donors on board. And this phase may even take years to achieve, and not many people get here because all the progress is achieved almost exclusively through the founder's efforts. It's their planning, their orchestration, their problem solving skills that drive progress. And as they create value, they end up attracting others around themselves. Um, these are business partners, staff members, volunteers, board members. And for the founder, this feels like support. Finally, it's not just them carrying the whole thing alone. Then there's phase two. This is where a few of those people begin to step up in major ways. Often it's one key individual, someone a lot like the founder, who is entrepreneurial in their own right, who can move things forward even with very limited resources. And the founder may also start pulling in special advisors at the stage, getting guidance on how to build towards the next level. And that's where phase three begins. It's the tipping point. It's where growth gets sustained, where it's no longer about the founder or one key person, it's about a leadership group. Progress is carried by many, many people. The founder shifts from being the driver of everything to directing and aligning the vision, while others carry the execution of the actual work. And when founders reach this point, they'll say something like, I never imagined it would get this big. Because now growth is compounding. It's happening through others. And this phase is really the end goal for most businesses. But as they attempt to go from phase two to phase three is where most of them get stuck because making the leap requires a very specific kind of leadership. But most founders aren't surrounded by that type of leadership that's required to take things to the next level. And the founder will understand this actually. He's going to understand that they need to develop their leadership capacity, which boils down to three things. The first is accountability, or you could say willingness. This is are people willing to step up enough to push things forward? Then you have competence or capabilities. This is the skills the team has or needs, like marketing and technology, whatever's missing to actually scale the business. In small teams, people have to wear many hats, and the founder just learns enough to keep everything moving forward. And then you have strategy. These are the ground realities. The founder is constantly factoring in a million things in his decisions, like financial or resource constraints and alignment with the vision. So these are the three main pillars for growth, and we'll see how some of these break down. And there's also a few big shifts that show up in his own leadership style as he starts leaning into influencing others to improve those pillars. He goes from being the solo driver, making every decision himself, to working more collaboratively. Now he's looking for buy-in, especially on major decisions. And he starts to genuinely care about the people around him and their well-being. And he also becomes more self-reflective. Instead of looking outward at others, he starts asking himself questions like, how am I showing up as a leader, and what do I need to change in myself? And at this stage, leadership is really about shaping the culture. It's about getting the team to take ownership and really self-organize around opportunities and problems, and build without everything defaulting back to the founder. Every time something complicated shows up, or if something needs to be orchestrated and organized, the team can sort of figure things out by themselves. And it's really about building a culture of accountability. It's like a willingness to step up, and not just in the sense of micromanagement or deadlines, but also take responsibility for progress and own outcomes, or in other words, get true leaders. As he tries to go beyond his bandwidth and implement leadership practices, growth isn't what the founder experiences. Instead of the progress that he was expecting, things actually begin to stall. The culture will often be there in theory. People will also be talking about growth, and there's going to be, it's going to seem like there's a high level of motivations within the individuals. But for him and everyone there, they'll be able to feel that the momentum isn't building the way it should. And pretty much what looks like the foundation for phase three will start to feel stuck. And this is really the first big signal that fundamental leadership practices on their own don't guarantee sustained growth. This really has to do with two specific challenges in phase two. The first one is over dependence on a key resource. What happens is progress becomes tied to one or two key people, and the founder leans way too heavily on them, especially when he doesn't realize that they're not aligned. And the second is the struggle to separate signal from noise. Um, Oftentimes, you'll see advice flying around from very impressive people within the organization or within the network of the organization. But the question is, what's actually critical right now? What's going to move the organization forward, and what's just a distraction? And the tricky part of this is that these seem like good things on the surface level. Having a strong person you can rely on sounds like a good thing. Getting lots of input and ideas from advisors in the team, that sounds like engagement. But as we unpack this, we'll see that these are the things that actually stall growth. And if the founder can't navigate them properly, the stall doesn't just continue. What I've noticed is that things will actually start to decline. Now, the question is here on the slide, is the founder pulling the team up, or are they pulling him down in this phase? Take a second to absorb this. Okay, so let's unpack overdependence. What you will usually have is one person on the team who becomes the key resource. They've historically been there for major milestones. Maybe they helped achieve major revenue goals. Maybe they carried progress when nobody else was. Whatever the case is, because of that history, they earned a lot of trust, and the founder starts to lean more and more on them, not just for their function, but growth itself. And on paper, it makes sense. The person is entrepreneurial. They step up, they get things done. But the problem is that they become too central. And basically, the organization's ability to move forward is now tied to this one individual's willingness or capacity. So what happens is that the founder leans on this key resource more and more, and their capacity keeps getting stretched as they're trying to go into phase three from phase two. They're effectively trying to compound growth on the backs of too few people. It's more work than what's reasonable for one person to carry. And from what I've seen is that this person will make some personal sacrifices. And sometimes that involves putting other parts of their life on hold. Whatever it is they're trying to do, they're trying to contribute to the greater good of the team. And there's a few different team dynamics here. If it's a staff member, there's much more of a tendency to become quiet and just bear what the founder does, as opposed to a business partner or a volunteer who may feel less inclined to staying quiet about their grievances, or they may just leave or take an extended break. But what ultimately happens is that the growth that they had envisioned doesn't show up the way that they had envisioned it. And they don't see a lot of the things that they had expected to see within a specific time frame. Maybe it's impact targets or revenue goals within a 5 year period. Whatever it is, the organization isn't where they thought it would be at a point in time they had expected it to be there by. And the key resources really feel that. They start to see stagnation instead of growth, and they don't see the fruits of their labor. And over time, that turns into heavy resentment. They feel like they've given so many years and for what? And somewhere in this, they'll start questioning the founder's competence. Like, if he was leading better, if he was maximizing the team better, maybe we wouldn't be stuck here. And there's some pretty major repercussions if resentment isn't dealt with in the right way as it starts to build. And this negativity is compounded by the fact that the founder is not surrounded by the right kind of advisors who can help him navigate these types of issues. They're pretty much supporting this behavior. They tell him just keep up the hard work. And really all they see is the external, but they have no clue what's actually going on inside. So what ends up happening is the cycle just repeats, more stretching, more frustration, more stagnation. And the thing is, the founder will periodically try to launch new growth initiatives, leaning heavily on the same key resources. There may even be breakthrough moments, but it always circles back to the same place. It's a cycle of stagnation that starts. And every time the cycle repeats, more resentment builds. And eventually, the founder's own ambitions will start to take a hit too. After so many failed attempts to sustain growth, he'll just kind of start giving up on the idea of sustained growth. And this is where the stall really locks in. It becomes about misalignment. There's no willingness to move in the direction of the founder for the key resource. And when the key resources stop envisioning the larger vision, they stop working toward it. They're more focused on preserving their own positions, and they know the dynamics. They know the founder relies on them. He won't make major moves without them. So they can even champion growth initiatives on the surface, knowing full well that their bandwidth will hit a limit and that things will retreat back to the status quo. And the real problem is that you end up with a lot of talk and surface level support without like needle moving work or real results. And to make things worse, they feel comfort from his practice of leadership. Um, and this breeds complacency instead of accountability, especially in cases where they start doubting his abilities and they stop seeing the vision. And this is what I call the founder's dilemma. He's applying leadership practices in a context that he doesn't understand has shifted to something else. His team isn't intrinsically motivated anymore, they're not purpose driven, and the culture he wants to create is gone. And no matter how good his leadership intentions are, you can't maximize the team's potential because there's no more willingness to step up in major ways and really make progress for the organization, or at least in the way he's imagining the compounding and sustained growth. And so he gets stuck in this deadlock because he's very predictable. And this affects the larger team, especially as new people come on. Usually there's passing up of important information or to their colleagues. They see things on the ground, opportunities or problems that matter, but information isn't really being digested or used in any meaningful way. And when this sets in, the collective energy of the team declines pretty fast. Without that energy, the team stops doing the kind of deep thinking that's needed, where people connect dots in their downtime. There's deep reflection. There's some very creative solutions, the type of solutions that you need when you're strapped for resources. This is very much about using the mind's default mode network. And the business pretty much loses its ability to synthesize important insights from different perspectives, usually those closest to the ground realities. And this leads to a very misaligned and a very transactional culture where it's no longer about being motivated, it's about looking motivated. The willingness, the work, the progress, it's all very surface level. And it pretty much becomes a game of perception. People say the right things, they'll even nod along, but nobody really believes that they're going to see the vision fully play out. And this leads to key resources cementing themselves in positions of power. And the team pretty much loses its ability to organize themselves around solving problems and taking advantage of opportunities to build capabilities. This is every individual's ability to wear different hats and see how they can help the team in new circumstances. The ability to self organize is critical to moving into phase three. And they start shifting their energy away from driving growth toward maintaining the status quo. And that's not openly resisting growth, but it's in ways that keep people's roles secure. Sometimes that's about controlling information or influencing team members, and sometimes it has to do with bringing in new people and filling in open seats. The founders are always on the lookout for new people who can help them in moving things forward. But the problem is that more capable or motivated people can potentially shift the balance and weaken positions if they step into key roles. So what ends up happening is the businesses become a revolving door for those trying to actually move things forward. And again, the founder is surrounded by advisors who may not understand these dynamics. So when they feel like the business is stagnating, they'll cement strict roles and build rigid hierarchy. But in this phase two, things need to stay as flat as possible. Anyone should be able to bring any idea to the table and they should feel supported in talking about growth and where they fit in. This helps ground realities surface, and it's the kind of environment that keeps people motivated and aligned with the vision. And by the time the founder reaches phase two, they're usually surrounded by a circle of advisors and board members. And on paper, these people look very impressive. They've had big roles in large organizations. They know corporate systems, and they carry a lot of authority with them. But here's the problem: success in a big established company doesn't translate to success in a scrappy, resource constrained phase two business. In large organizations, resources are abundant, roles are clearly identified, and the foundation for that type of skill are already in place. The job there is to play a small part in managing stability. But the very nature of phase two is about something entirely different. It's about building the entire thing from the ground up and seeing the entire picture before it's actually there. That's why their advice often sounds good in theory, but it misses the mark in practice and in reality. They'll suggest things like let's automate, let's buy software, or let's add more management layers. And that all looks very convincing. It looks like progress, but it doesn't actually move the organization forward. In fact, what actually ends up happening is that they create a lot of distractions. They'll actually pile on extra work and they'll actually stretch an already exhausted team even thinner. It's all noise. And it's not just about the bad advice, it's about the psychology. In corporate life, these advisors are rewarded for doing work that's pretty mundane. People are rewarded for activity that looks productive, hitting deadlines, running predictable processes, managing appearances. That kind of reward system creates an overconfidence that influences the founder and affects the business's ability to make strategic decisions. Phase two requires creativity, it requires adaptability, and leaders who can wrestle with the complexity and constraints. That's why signal is so important, and it comes from the ground realities. It comes from paying attention to what the team closest to the work is seeing, and those who have the energy to connect dots and spot a few critical decisions that will push the big domino over, instead of fighting every fire until the energy just runs out. And that's really how you develop capabilities that will tip the organization into phase three. The real test for the founder at this stage is learning how to filter advice and figuring out who to get advice from. He really just needs one or two advisors who truly understand early stage growth and also staying close to the people who are running experiments, and basically just creating enough space for deep thinking so real signal can emerge. Founders who master this breakthrough, those who don't end up caught in noise and endless cycles of hard work and distraction, and all that just leads to burnout. Sustained growth doesn't come from the loudest voices or the fanciest resumes. It comes from building the right leadership group, who are aligned with the realities of this stage. And big goals require big measures. This is where the leader gets tested not by making reckless moves, but by recognizing when the structure itself is blocking growth and acting decisively. I saw this firsthand leading growth, for a leader who had scaled a nonprofit year after year. The organization we came in, to help had been stuck in a phase two for nearly a decade. He had to make a drastic call of ripping and replacing the leadership team. It's never about doing what's popular because you can never please everyone. It's about pulling the team up by making very difficult decisions when they're required to get everyone on the same strategic page and ensure accountability so that everyone can contribute towards a unified vision. The big picture is this: founders in phase two don't fail because they lack vision, they fail because they depend on the wrong people. The path forward isn't about pushing harder, it's about building differently, building the right leadership group, building the right culture, building critical capabilities, creating space for experiments and self organization, keeping the team energized to think deeply and solve complex problems. Lasting growth doesn't come from effort alone, it comes from building the right foundations. This is the work I do, helping phase two businesses break through stagnation, unlock high performance team dynamics, and build marketing and strategy capabilities that lead to phase three. Right now, I'm looking for organizations that are looking to make a real difference, but they face growth challenges. If you're uniquely impacting the world, let's explore the opportunity to collaborate and unlock potential together.